There are some journalists like Matt Taibi at Rolling Stone who are now reporting that the Fed might do another round of quantitative easing. That sounds complicated, right? But it's actually very simple. Just mean the Fed is going to print more money. They already printed $1 trillion during the bailouts. Now they might print more. Do you know what they do with the money they print? You're going to be shocked, so I hope you're sitting down. Turns out they give it to the banks. I didn't see that coming. In the first QE, as the cool kids call it, they did some quantitative easing of the banks by buying up their toxic mortgages. In the new round, they would again let the banks unload more of their troublesome mortgages on the Fed. In fact, this is the new way to do bailouts. Gretchen Morgenson of the New York Times reported last week that there's a giant loophole in the finance reform bill that allows the Fed to rescue the top banks if an emergency were to arise. After the TARP debacle, the bankers have figured out how to rob us more efficiently. There's no point in asking the taxpayers for the money anymore. Turns out the American people hate that idea. So then they just go to the Fed and get the money from them. That's much easier. It's all good until we realize there might be a downside to the Fed printing $2 trillion. When inflation hits along with unemployment, we'll be back at the fun times of stagflation. But the bankers will have all gotten much richer by then, so mission accomplished. Matt Taibi is a political reporter and a writer for Rolling Stone. I just mentioned him earlier. He joins us now. How are you, Matt?
How's it going, Jack?
Good, good.
See you again.
It's good except for all this QE nonsense,
yeah.
Right?
QE makes my head hurt, man. It does.
All right, so look, I want to understand how they buy stuff, because that's really important, right? So the Fed will print money, will buy new things. What are they buying, and how are they buying them?
Well, first of all, just got to back up and realize that this is really the third strategy for stimulating the economy. The first two we've already done. You can slash interest rates to nothing to stimulate the economy, but we were already at zero. We've already done that. You can have the government, hire people to build bridges and roads. We've already done that to the tune of almost $800 billion. So this is the third and last strategy, which is just to print a whole bunch of money and buy stuff with it. And they already did one round of this. They did over $1.5 trillion of buying mortgages and treasury bonds. That was called QE1, and that was between March of '09 and March of this year. And now they're going to do another round of this where they just go out and they buy a whole bunch of treasury bonds and probably a little bit of mortgages too, and that's how they're going to do it.
See, that's the part I don't understand. When you go to the mortgages, buy the mortgages. I know that they bought toxic mortgages the first time around. They're buying new mortgages. Who determines the price? And what do the banks get to pick their worst mortgages? I mean, why do they want to sell their good mortgages? You see what I'm saying?
Well, from what I understand, this is sort of a wink-wink kind of nudge-nudge system where the people at the Fed basically talk to the guys at the banks and they say, we're going to be buying a whole bunch of X, so you should load up on X, and then in a week and a half or so, you can sell it all to us. So they go out into the market, and it's sort of this informal, like you said, it's basically a bailout of the banks. If you're at, say, one of those big banks, multinational banks, you go out and you buy a whole bunch of Fannie Mae's or whatever it is, and then in a week and a half's time, you can go and sell it to the Fed at above market rates, and it's basically free money.
Oh, well, that's a good scam. Can I get in on it?
No, you can't. That's kind of the key thing. And the other thing is, when you buy this stuff, when you sell this stuff to the Fed, you have to keep the money at the Fed, where you can now collect interest. That money just sits there and it collects a small amount of interest. So again, it's just basically free money for the banks.
So, like, let's say it's $100, and then today, right, a mortgage as an example,
right.
And they know the Fed's going to buy it at 120, so they go out and buy it at 105, whatever it is.
Of these mortgages at 100, and then next week they're selling it at 120 or whatever it is.
So, but now the mortgage isn't actually worth 120,
no.
And so when the Fed loses money on it, like right. I assume at some point they sell it, right?
Well,
so
yeah.
What happens when the Fed loses money?
Well, I mean, the future consequences of all this stuff are just dastardly on all sides. I mean, remember, if all this money ends up in the economy, you're just suddenly releasing $2 trillion or $2.5 trillion into the economy, and next thing you know, it's like a friend of mine said, "Where's Zimbabwe?" I mean, the dollar is going to be toilet paper. You have a hyperinflationary situation, and that's a disaster. I mean, there are all kinds of potential negative consequences of this that really are a disaster to even think about.
So when we have the inflation that, at this point we're not worried about it, but soon we're going to be if you pump in all this money. I remember like the old days of Argentina when they would just keep printing money, right. And then it wound up in a disaster. How does that hurt the average guy?
Well, because his money's worth less. I mean, once the dollar is depreciated, if you have money in your bank account and it's worth 3/4 of what it was a few months ago, then you've lost all that money, and you're basically, that money is gone to subsidize capitalizing the banks. It's a straight up capital transfer from ordinary people who have savings to banks that are now making profits.
And who runs the Fed that makes this decision? I mean, obviously we got Bernanke, right? But who's behind Bernanke?
Well, I mean, it's the presidents of the individual Federal Reserves. The New York Fed is obviously a big power in all of this. But the important thing to remember about all this is that the Federal Reserve officials are not really elected officials. I mean, obviously they're appointed by an elected official. But none of this stuff, there's no referendum on this program by any elected officials, really. I mean, think about the brouhaha there was over an $800 billion stimulus. That was a massive national controversy. And here you have a program that's probably twice that size and doesn't even involve real money. It's money we're inventing out of thin air, and you hear almost nothing about it. It's really amazing.
Right, and the banks are the ones that picks a lot of the people on the New York Fed, right? On the bank.
Obviously,
so
yes.
it's the banks paying themselves.
Right.
So, I mean, that's a good racket,
yeah,
right?
It's a great racket if you can get a part of it.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. And so is this is this a way of doing the biggest bank robbery of all time?
Yeah,
basically where the banks decide, hey, you know what, we're going to pay ourselves, and eventually your money's going to be worth less, but that's not our problem, it's your problem.
Right. It's great for them in the short term. It's terrible for us in the long term, and it's just one of another of these long lines of bank robberies that have been going on in the last 2.5 years. I mean, if you borrow money at 0% interest and lend it back to the government at 3% interest, I mean, that's also a bank robbery. This kind of stuff has been going on under everybody's noses, and nobody really does anything about it, and it's kind of amazing.
Matt, real quick, last thing here. Did they figure out, oh my God, why am I right about this? Why the hell are we going to the taxpayers? They don't like this stuff. Let's just do an end run around it, and let's just go to the Fed and just print the money.
Right, exactly.
Is that right? Is that the new scam?
Right. I mean, effectively it works out that way. I mean, everybody who's involved with this will have a justification for it. They'll all say we're doing this because we're desperate to kickstart the economy. But, on an individual level, it works out great for a whole lot of the people involved, and you have to wonder about their motives.
Gee, I wonder how that happened. All right, Rolling Stone's Matt Taibi doing some great work on this story. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.